Welcome back to Mr. Terry's Flip Classroom. Today we're going to be talking about archaic Greece. Remember, we've already talked about Neolithic Greece, we've talked about the early Bronze Age in Greece, and then we've also gone over the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. But today we're moving into the more modern part of Greece, which most people know about. So let's get started. First of all, geography is going to be a huge and very important thing that shapes Greece. So it is a part of the Balkan Peninsula that's in southern Europe. Also, as you can see through this topographical map, it is very mountainous. Greece is very, very mountainous. That's why we believe a lot of people at first settled on smaller islands like Crete. However, places like Athens and Sparta will be settled on the mainland of Greece. But these mountain chains are going to separate the city-states of Greece, which is going to lead to them having very unique cultures from city-state to city-state. That's why Athens and Sparta are just so different from one another. So, the Balkan Peninsula extends into the Mediterranean Sea, and it's also next to the Aegean Sea. Greece is also made up of hundreds of small islands that extend off the coast. This made them a vital source for trade. That was their main focus. They traded all the time. Sea is also... The archaic Greeks also traded things, though, in particular, like olive oil, wine, and marble. Greeks also, though, due to the trading, began to coin money during the Archaic period. This is something that they learned from the Persians and their King Darius. King Darius and the Persians were actually the very first to create money. However, Persians are not a Western civilization, they are an Eastern civilization, as they were settled in areas like Turkey and present-day Iraq. The Greeks also developed their very own form of alphabet from the Phoenician alphabet. Here it is right here. This is something that we still use today. This is what our alphabet is based off of. The Archaic period also gave way to the very first Olympics. The prize for winning, however, was only immortality, because they believed that if you had so much pride and won for your country, that you would live on forever in their memory. Right here, this is actually a plate, an ancient Greek archaic plate dated back to circa 500 BC. And as you notice, he's competing in the discus. The first Olympic events were like the javelin, most track events that you know about today. However, here's the catch. In ancient Greece, when you competed in the Olympics, you had to be in the nude. They believed that the human body was one of the most beautiful things in the world. Now here's where everything's going to get a little tricky. Each city-state governed themselves very different from city-state to city-state. However, each city-state originally is going to be called a polis. So, for example, it was the polis of Athens and the polis of Sparta. English words that contain the word polis as a root are places like metropolis, which means a huge city, or necropolis, which means the dead city. Necropolis is another word for a cemetery or a tomb. Now, the archaic polis consisted of two very, very specific parts. As you can see, the first one was the Acropolis, or the high city. It was built upon a hill. It contained the huge temples that most people know about from Greece. The Parthenon is on the Acropolis of Athens. These Acropolis, though, are going to be dedicated to different gods and goddesses and used for most of their religious ceremonies. The walled lower city, however, contained places of flatter ground for the places like the marketplace, which in Greek we call agora, the theater, the buildings and homes, places like that. Right here is the Athens Acropolis. As you can see right here, Parthenon is up top and the lower main city is at the bottom. These are the remains of what is left behind from ancient Athens. You can see right here, this looks like a temple possibly, and then as you can tell, Greece was still very mountainous. Now the marketplace was very important in the lower main city. It was a place where most Greeks met to debate, trade, talk, and actually grow their intelligence. They'd have festivals for the city, honoring their special gods and goddesses there as well. This is the remains of the agora in Athens. As you can see, there are many different chambers for individual store owners, as also places in the middle for meetings. Now, rights of the citizens in Greece were very unequal. Landowning men held all of the political power. Early forms of Greek government include a monarchy, which was one ruler, an aristocracy, which was nobles or the rich ruled over everyone, and then also the oligarchy, which means that only a small few people that were wealthy ruled over everyone. Now, someone's going to come in and change this eventually, but we'll talk about him later. The main two city-states from Archaic Greece that most everyone knows about is Athens and Sparta. Right here, you can see that they had the most influence in all of Archaic Greece. Right here, Sparta in red controlled places around above Athens, also going up, extending into Macedonia. Athens controlled most of the coastal plains of Greece, and then there were also a few other Greek areas like Thebes and Crete as well. Now, Sparta was a very different place from Athens. They were all about being a warrior society. They were settled originally, of course, by the Dorians after they pushed out the Mycenaeans. They turned conquered people into slaves called helots. Helots did all of the farming. This let every Spartan male grow up to be one thing and one thing alone. That's a soldier. Spartan government, however, was controlled by two men, or kings, and then a council of elders, or advisors. These advisors were chosen by the community. Citizens were Spartan-born men over the age of 30. That means male children under the age of 30, also women, and any helot was not considered to be a citizen. They were subjects. Spartan life was ruled completely by discipline and the idea of becoming a soldier. This extended to the fact that all newborn Spartan children were actually inspected by the government. If you were underweight or sick, you were taken out in the woods and abandoned to die and be eaten by the wolves because they had no use for you. They wanted strong women to produce strong soldiers, and they wanted strong soldiers to win battles. At 7, boys are going to begin their military training. They were removed from home at the age of 7. Could you imagine that? Being left, like fellas anyway, could you imagine being pulled away from your mother and father at the age of 7 to not live with them ever again? They are going to be moved into the barracks, and they're going to be toughened up by a coarse diet, hard exercise, and a very rigid discipline. Also, they had to train naked when they were originally learning their military training, so they would understand what it felt like to be cut by a sword, so they would be better at dodging the blows. This is the best part, though. To develop sneakiness, boys were encouraged to steal food from the officers. This was basically to try and make sure that they were developing cunning and being quick and witty. But however, if you got caught, you were brutally beaten in front of all of your male counterparts in the training yard. At age 20, men could finally get married. However, they still had to live in the barracks for another 10 years. They couldn't live with their wife until they were at least 30 years old. Women in Sparta also had a very important role. They were required to exercise and strengthen their bodies every day at the same time. They wanted the Spartan women to be able to produce promising warriors. They could inherit property, however, they had to listen to their husbands at all times. As you can see right here, this is an archaic statue of a Spartan woman exercising. It's circa about 500 BC. Now, Sparta also isolated themselves from all the other Greeks. Citizens were not allowed to travel and were discouraged from trading with others. They wanted to stay within themselves because they were mainly all about protecting one another and then also just being a very military society. This made them very unique but also very deadly. Athens, however, is the complete opposite. It's like the weird cousin to Sparta. However, they developed many things we still use today. This is modern-day Athens. As you can tell from its earliest beginnings up here on the Acropolis, where they had the temple to Athena, this whole city expanded and promised throughout history. Now, Athens started as an aristocracy, which means that the wealthy landowners were in charge. Wealth is going to grow very rapidly. However, Solon, though, is going to come in and change the government forever. He was appointed chief official in 594 BC, and he is considered the father of all modern-day government. He outlawed things like debt slavery and then also pushed Athens towards a democracy. This is a bust of him right here. This is the man that actually came up with the ideas that we use in our government today. Remember, his name's Solon. Don't forget that. He was overthrown, however, by tyrants eventually. These are people who gain power through force. These tyrants, luckily, though, are going to take some of his teachings and develop some of the first legislatures. That's a law-making body of people who debated laws and were elected by the citizens. Now, the funny thing about how elections were excuse me, about how elections were practiced in Athens is that they actually had two separate barrels full of rocks. They had a barrel full of white rocks and they had a barrel full of black rocks. And if you wanted to vote for the representative from your area, you chose their corresponding color, and then you threw it into a large pile. The officials would then count up all the stones to figure out who won the vote and who was going to be a part of the legislature. Only land-owning male citizens, however, could even qualify to help in the government. Women were not allowed. Athenian women, however, did participate in society. They couldn't be in politics, but they ran the entire household. They were essential for many religious rituals as well as rearing children. They were the ones who raised everyone. This right here, these are Athenian women going to the well during the day to collect water. Now, also, the reason why Athens stood out so much as an intelligent Mecca is because they educated the youth at a very early age. This is actually a plate from about 400 BC from Athens. As you can see right here, the instructor is teaching this young man, the Greek alphabet, and the man over here is playing the harp. Boys attended school if the family could afford it. So unfortunately, it wasn't like school today where everyone is entitled to an education. However, they did learn to read, write, study music, memorize poetry, and they became very well versed in public speaking, so they could hopefully eventually become a part of the government. They received some, but very little military training. Athens dominated the ocean, not the land with foot soldiers. The religion, though, that's going to originate in the Archaic period is very important. Archaic Greeks believed that all gods lived on an actual mountain in northern Greece called Mount Olympus. To discover the will of the gods, the people talked to these ones called oracles. Oracles were priests and priestesses, so you were actually ladies allowed to be a priestess in Archaic Greece, but the oracles were the ones that were supposed to be able to speak to the gods. Myths, remember, were used to replace science to explain the natural world. Several gods that were originated during the Archaic time period are Zeus, his brothers Poseidon and Hades, his wife Helena, Athena, Ares. You could name several. This right here is the actual Mount Olympus in northern Greece. Not going to lie, if I were an ancient Greek person, I would probably think gods lived up there too. Now, new warfare methods, however, are going to shape Greece completely differently than it was used to. They used iron. In Archaic Greece, they were going to start to use iron weapons, shields, and armor. This is a huge deal and a huge difference between the Bronze Age, which they used bronze weapons, shields, and armor. Remember, iron is much stronger than bronze, and it is a better metal, and it keeps an edge for longer. Now, the phalanx. The phalanx is a very massive tactical unit that made Greece stand out as such a well-dominant military power, especially Sparta. Sparta was the #1 people who used the phalanx. If you've ever seen the movie 300, you've seen this before. It is a tactical formation using armored soldiers and spears. The idea is that this row up front has a spear and a set of shields, and then the men behind them have a spear and a set of shields. So if one man falls, the next man stands up to replace them. Now the city-states, however, are going to begin to grow, and they are going to give way to the very first Western society. This is what Greek is going to look like at the height of the Archaic period. Now, we're going to talk more along the lines of things that happened during the Archaic period and the Classical period. We're going to get into the Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian Wars as well. And then also, later on next week, we'll talk about Alexander the Great and his Hellenistic period. I look forward to seeing y'all then. Have a good night.